one of the things that we'll start showing, if you want to, for a moment, if you can provide, this is the authorization for the study that's due in June. And then I want to show you a series of things. So let's look at this for a moment. This is a very interesting case. Cache Landrum, you probably have all heard of it. This was actually a extraterrestrial vehicle that was being test flown by 4 humans out of the Nevada test range. And this we have from an Air Force intelligence guy who is the principal investigator. You'll see his clip later talking about the fact that he debriefed the pilots of this and what happened. As you know, the people underneath this object, when it was out of control, were irradiated and were extremely and very sick, had to be hospitalized. One of the famous cases in 1980. Now, what happened is that when this occurred, they couldn't get the extraterrestrial energy power plant to work. So they put on, foolishly, a portable nuclear power plant on this thing. And they were test flying it out of the Nevada test range, Area 51. By the way, nobody calls it that, but people don't know what's out there. And it was being flown to a base in Texas. It went out of control outside Houston, Huffman, Texas, I believe it was. And it came down and irradiated, and actually irradiated the land there. And actually, that whole road had to be repaved clandestinely. Now, the public was left to believe this was, the aliens came down and poisoned everybody. Or they didn't say. They were happy for people to reach and leap to these conclusions. In reality, we have now proof and testimony from the principal investigator for the Air Force who debriefed the 4 pilots on this, humans. And that object, my friend, was test flown by humans, but it was extraterrestrial. So this is a hybrid case where you have an extraterrestrial air form and systems, but the power energy system, they couldn't quite get to work. They put this nuclear power plant on it. It had a filter or some problem where it malfunctioned, started spewing this stuff out to these poor victims who have never been compensated. In fact, the case went to court. The judge threw it out because the government said, we don't know what this is. We had nothing to do with it. But the truth is, they weren't lying. The government, people talk about the government. Which government? Who in the government? The nature of an unacknowledged special access project like this is that if the Secretary of Defense doesn't know about it and the director of the CIA isn't read into it and they're lying to the president about it, do you think the public information officer or the case officer for an Air Force base near Houston is going to know what the hell this was? No. So they're not lying. This is plausible deniability, because since they don't know, they can testify under oath, this wasn't ours. We know nothing about this. Now we know for a fact, and we have the recorded video testimony of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, principal investigator on this, Richard Doty, who is a master of disinformation in his career, but is coming clean on some of this. So next, what we're going to see are a series of schematics and cases of over the years, very interesting. This is 1956, sort of a domed object with these underneath. This was a man-made anti-gravity vehicle from the 50s that was seen, and we can go to the drawing of it. Very good, excellent illustrations. And a very well-documented case. I'm going to go through a number of these examples. Next. This is one from New Zealand, our friends from down under. This was also a man-made object. The date on this is listed somewhere below there. I believe it was in the 50s. And that object, a very well-documented case, occurred, and someone came out and it was a human in sort of an astronaut suit. It had these flames, so it had a combination of anti-gravity and also other types of energy systems. And people say, oh, this is from New Zealand. I said, oh yeah, 1959. This is a really interesting one. Again, the dates, this was 1966. Love the Mustang. And there was an object that came in and for some reason landed malfunction another early prototype of a man-made electrogravitic, meaning anti-gravity, high voltage system. And it rose up and took off like a spark off a grinder, is how it was described. But you can see there's some components of it from conventional aerospace aircraft on the front, the bubble. But this was, again, it sort of had a high drilling, whining sound as it took off and was gone. And this is man-made, 1966. And this is very similar to some of the Tic Tac things. It's got an arc on it, but a very interesting object, reminiscent of some of the Tic Tac and other objects. We have a number of videos of these canister and cylinder objects. This was seen in enough detail. And you can see the rivets. You can see the detail. An extraterrestrial vehicle is seamless, has no parts like that, has no welds. Those, when you see those, my friends, those are not extraterrestrial. Those are man-made. And there are a series of generations of these that have been rolled out since the 50s operationally. They were studied before then. This is a really interesting one. Again, this 1972, so we're talking almost 50 years ago. Looks like an iron with this rectangular object on it that was seen, and multiple witnesses. Again, this is a man-made platform, a silent electrogravitic. And this is a really interesting one. This is from also 72. It has these sort of flaming energy out of the rear of it, and a bubble. Another one from that's man-made. I don't forget which city this was over.
Venezuela.
Yeah, in Venezuela. And people say, really, these other countries? Oh, yes, all over the world. I mean, these operations are not just out of remote places like Area 51. So they have these facilities all over the world, you know, Alice Springs here and there, and all over, and they can go anywhere very quickly because they're not using jets and rockets. Because even our most, you know, really extraordinary craft may get to anywhere in the world in a couple hours. These don't take that long. So those have been experimented with in different shapes, forms, and sizes. Many of them are based on acquired extraterrestrial vehicles that we have shot down and studied and then experimented with the airframe and the propulsion and energy systems, the flaming ellipse. This is an interesting one. This is from 1980s. I'm just taking you in chronological order. Number one, there are a lot of objects that are sort of rectangular or domed rectangles, totally silent, can float over the landscape. Many of the objects we'll get to in a moment, and seeing the Hudson Valley back in the 80s, 90s, were those kinds of objects. These are, again, electromagnetogravitics. These are pop culture anti-gravity, and different versions of them, different airframes, different experimental types, and many of them have been deliberately flown over populated areas to prompt a UFO sighting, but make people think that they are the extraterrestrial ones. So you have two things going on simultaneously: actual extraterrestrial vehicles and the ones that are made by clandestine aerospace and black budget funding in the unacknowledged special access projects, the deep black world of engineering. I mean, all these cases, look, we have hundreds and hundreds. This would go on for days if we were going, but these are very interesting, excellent drawings. Now, this case, of course, I was very involved with, as you know. This is the Japan Airlines case of 747 going over Alaska, and we can go up, and the pilot had this massive vehicle come forward. This is a real one. It was a large, seamless, almost like walnut-shaped object, massive. That was the Japan Airlines case. That's one of the disclosure witnesses, as you know, was Mr. Callahan, and he was the chief FAA person in charge of accidents and incidents when this occurred during the Reagan years. And he actually has handed to us, and I have, the original radar films, check tracings, not a copy, the originals. We have them. And the Japan Airlines pilot encountered this object, and it would be, you know, this part of the sky at 1 second, and a couple sweeps of the radar or one sweep would be in another direction altogether. And the pilot, the Japanese pilot described it. It was actually on military radar, on board, visually seen, and civilian radar. So this got kicked up to the highest level of the FAA. And at that meeting, if you remember the disclosure project, the CIA came in and said, we're going to confiscate all of the data on this. And they had just stacks and stacks of digital data on this case. And so they had to give it up. And Mr. Callahan says, yeah, okay, we'll give it to you. Turns out those were copies. He kept the originals. And when he left the FAA, he took them, and we have them. This is a very interesting, a pyramid-shaped object. We have a model similar to it here. Now this has all kinds of tubes and structures on the bottom. And what's interesting, this is 1994, there are extraterrestrial vehicles that are pyramid-shaped. But there are also man-made ones that they've made to look like them. So they're copycat. You see what they're doing? So it's like the old commercial. Is it real or is it Memorex? And this is a great one. I like this one because we may have, this is also in England, 1990. And this one is great because it has, if you look at the underside, there are the girders and the structures, and they're even weld marks. Now, of course, this is a triangular, and the people under it could see that and could see the light in the center and the three on the end. That is man-made. That is an anti-grav object. And we have many people who have been in the aerospace classified projects who have described these and how they operate. And so we have massive files on these sort of different kinds of triangles. Now, just to make things more complex, because the world is complex, there are extraterrestrial vehicles that are triangular and that are saucer shaped and that are other weird shapes. So to make things complicated here, how are you going to know? Well, you got to be close enough to it to see. And if you can't see the superstructure detail, you're not going to know whether it's extraterrestrial or not. But I'll give you these few hints. The ET ones are not manufactured by digging stuff up and soldering things together and what have you. That's not how they manufacture. They are doing it through a frequency sonic resonance manufacturing that pulls from a template an object in its entirety as a piece from the elementals, let's call it, of space-time, the foundation of energy of space-time. And it comes into 3D, like 3D printing, but for a whole spacecraft, but not putting plastic molding injectors in, but it being brought from the finest foundation of energy, not only the 0 point, but beyond that even trans-dimensionally. So this is trans-dimensional manufacturing. And then this one, again, this is a very interesting one. This is the very famous Phoenix Lights one. Who was here for that? Anybody? I was. So there are a couple events that happened then. And we have had both ET vehicles, then piggybacked on man-made events. And this is really confusing because once there's something that really happens demonstrably, that is a sighting or an event, they will then put up objects and have things occur that are the man-made ones to confuse people. And they'll even do other decoys, so drop flares, all kinds of things. So when I was here in March of 1997, I flew in on an airline, and as I was doing final approach into Sky Harbor Airport, I did the CE5 protocols and asked the ETs to do something that would be very definitive that night or while I was there, because we were at a digital lab that was run by an intelligence group. And we were getting the best photos and videos that we could for the whole planet for the congressional briefings in April of 1997. That's why I was here. And then a few hours later, this whole event happened, Phoenix Lights. And there were a lot of things that were coming out of the South Mountains, Last November, when we were here for the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind premiere, we did a hike up there and came down at sunset, and an object dropped, materialized right over us and went. You saw it. A couple of people who are my friends here were there with me and saw it. So you have both phenomena happening. And this is the problem. People are going to say, it's all man-made, it's all extraterrestrial. No, and we need to get another layer of understanding here. And particularly any important thing that happens, by definition, is going to be inundated with a cover story, and where they're going to deceive people from the real over to the staged, the DDT, let's call it.